I want to bring in former Democratic Senator from Missouri and MS Now political analyst Claire McCaskill. Peter Baker is chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MS Now contributor. With me here in studio, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. So, Lisa, walk us through exactly what we know and what we don't know.
Let's start with what we know. Chris, we know that at some point in the past, probably in 2019, but we're not positive, a woman came forward and identified herself not only as a Jeffrey Epstein survivor, but as someone who experienced sexual abuse at the hands of President Trump. What we don't know is when she made that accusation and exactly how she made that accusation. We know from a human source who has seen documents that are not entirely unredacted for the public consumption that the woman who made this accusation against President Trump is the same woman as someone who was interviewed by the FBI 4 times in the summer of 2019. One of those interview memoranda from the FBI is publicly available in the Epstein files. That doesn't contain, however, any accusation against President Trump. If anything, the woman acknowledges that she's met him before without any elaboration, but also says, in response to the FBI agents wanting to see a picture on her phone of Jeffrey Epstein, where he is pictured with Donald Trump, she basically asks if she can crop Trump out of the photo because she, as her lawyer identifies, is fearful of retaliation and does not want to incriminate anybody else. And yet, we know from internal FBI documents in 2025 that this same woman, whose name appears, again, in unredacted documents, is a person who made accusations against President Trump. We're missing 3 other memoranda of interviews she conducted with the FBI in between August and October of 2019. Could those be the moments in which she made this accusation against President Trump? Absolutely, and likely so. But we can't say for certain because those documents are not available. And I want to contrast them, Chris, if I can, with other witnesses or other prominent survivors in the Epstein saga. There are other survivors for whom you can see on a publicly available index of prior witness statements that each and every one of the interview memoranda that was created with respect to those people are in fact available. That is not the case with respect to this particular accuser who says that she was abused by Epstein in the 1980s when she was a young teenager at a vacation home that he was renting.
So just to be clear, we don't know any specifics about any allegations or if they are true?
We know specifics about the allegations because the FBI discussed them between and amongst themselves on documents that have been released in 2025. And specifically what the FBI says is that this woman says that she was forced to perform oral sex on the president when she was around 13 years old, and that subsequent or during that same episode, the president hit her or slapped her in the face. We don't know where exactly she says that occurs. An FBI document reflects that she says this happened in New Jersey. We don't know who was with her, how she met the president. None of those details are readily apparent from the FBI internal documents stating this. And we don't know ultimately whether the FBI found her credible or not. What we do have is an index of the prior statements that they obtained from her. And in rapid succession, we can see that they interviewed her 4 times between July and October of 2019, and then it abruptly stopped, and we don't know why. There is one other document, Chris, that I want to mention because I think it sheds some light on it. There's a document, again, internal FBI communications in 2025, where they are listing people that are found in the Epstein files whose names are those of prominent individuals. The email is titled Names in JE File. Donald Trump's name appears at the very top, and in parentheses, there is something, I'm going to get the exact verbiage wrong, but the gist of it is that this particular accuser stopped cooperating with the FBI. We presume that they are talking about the same woman you and I are talking about, but we don't know that for certain. She is the only Trump accuser who, to date, appears to have made abuse or assault allegations against the president in the entirety of the Epstein files so far. She is the only one to have made that accusation, according to the FBI's own summaries in 25. So we assume that when in last summer as well, they're having a conversation between and among them about people whose names appear, and they say one accuser refused to cooperate with the FBI. We assume they're talking about this same woman. But again, We don't know why the FBI's interviews with this woman trailed off in the fall of 2019.
So, Peter, we have 4 interviews. We only have documentation, specific documentation of one of them. So what are the options for what's going on here as you see it?
Well, you're going to hear, obviously, a lot of people in Congress, I presume, asking questions about this because they passed a law that was very specific. You're supposed to release everything, in effect, other than these very, very narrow category. They don't, in terms of protecting women. The Justice Department said when it released this latest tranche, it did not withhold anything just because it might hurt somebody's reputation, just because a person might be a government official. So if that's the case, these would seem to be in conflict with that assurance. Congress, especially Ro Khanna and Tom Massie, the 2 congressmen who have been leading the fight on this, has a real stake in ensuring that its law is followed. So you would imagine that they would want to pursue this. I could imagine the possibility of, of hearings or even lawsuits, perhaps trying to force the Justice Department to release what seems to have been withheld, in contravention to what the law seems to very clearly say.
So, Senator, the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Robert Garcia, was on this network just a few minutes ago. I want to play what he had to say.
I myself reviewed these exact documents, the manifest, yesterday. I have seen other interviews and documentation with this survivor, but those additional documents seem to be missing. And that's something that I confirmed as of yesterday in my visit to the Department of Justice. The idea that there is a possible cover-up or that we are hiding actual documentation of an alleged crime by the President of the United States, of which a survivor appears to have made, is incredibly serious, and the DOJ has to explain to the public where are these possible documents and what do they say.
At this point, have you gotten any response from the DOJ as to why these specific documents aren't available?
I have not.
So the congressman says, Claire, they now want to investigate whether the Justice Department illegally withheld FBI interviews. What might that even look like? And what do you make of all this?
Well, somebody has not understood the premise that the cover-up is sometimes worse than the crime. Although if these allegations were true, this might be the exception because the crime would be worse than the cover-up. But I do think that, I don't know how they get out of this. I mean, they're in a hole and they just keep digging. It is very clear to the American people. I think like almost 80% of America thinks that Trump and his administration is trying to hide something. And all this does is add fuel to that fire. I don't understand it. I don't understand how they think they're going to get away with violating black and white, clear law that was passed with a bipartisan margin in the United States Congress. The courts will catch up to them, and eventually this stuff will come out. And it'll be an even bigger deal than it would have been had they followed the law in the first place.
You sound confident of that. Are you confident of that it will catch up to them, that the courts will act?
I can't imagine. This is, this Congress passed a law under very difficult circumstances where, frankly, Republicans never question Trump or go against his will. They did here. And that's a pretty clear exercise of constitutional power by the United States Congress. It would surprise me that the failure of the Justice Department to actually release these documents did not result in court decisions forcing their release.
So, Lisa, could this be a one-off, or do we think it's possible that the files of other witnesses might not have been produced in their totality as well?
Oh, I highly doubt that this is a one-off. Chris, let's talk about the index of those witness statements that I was referring to earlier, which allowed both us and NPR to sort of reverse engineer what was missing here. The Department of Justice produced to Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers statements from more than 550 people at one point in time prior to her criminal trial. Those included people that they never expected to testify at her trial. Those are 546 people, as well as almost 30 that they thought would. It is inconceivable to me that each and every document that the FBI categorized as a prior witness statement among those nearly 600 witnesses has been produced in full. And we know, just on a very cursory review on our own here at MS Now, that that is not, in fact, the case. I can think of, for example, there is one survivor who testified at the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. All of the interview memoranda that the FBI prepared with respect to interviewing her are in the files. But what's not in the files are the underlying notes. And I just want to break that down for a second so that our viewers understand the import of that. When the FBI interviews somebody who's a witness in a criminal investigation, the first thing that they do in bringing them in is take handwritten notes of that interview. There's nobody sitting there like almost like a court reporter transcribing it word for word. Someone is taking notes in part so that they can be fully present in the interview. Thereafter, they take those notes and they transform them into a narrative memo that explains what that witness had to say in full and complete sentences. That's not the way most people take notes, and oftentimes those memos have fewer details in them than the underlying notes. So it's significant to people like me. If we can't see the notes, but we can see the interview memoranda, that only gets us part of the way there with respect to what we think this law demanded and where we think there is no explicable reason why these things should be withheld, particularly since they were important enough to turn over to Ghislaine Maxwell and her legal team in her own criminal legal defense.
And Senator, I mentioned that there will be Epstein survivors in the audience at the State of the Union tonight. Does this become the dominant story of the night, even though we don't expect the president to actually address it in his speech?
Well, certainly he won't address it. I can't imagine he goes anywhere near it. I know that there are a great number of the survivors that will be in the room. And it will be interesting to see how that is covered, whether or not it gets the coverage it deserves, or whether Trump's performance will dominate. We know one thing for sure about what he's going to do tonight. We know one thing for sure, Chris, and that is that he will lie. And the extent and the audacity of those lies will probably dictate the dominant coverage of the night.